welcome once again to the NPTEL module on strategic trade and protectionism. We are now explaining a new chapter to the addition as an addition to imperfect competitive market, as an addition to international trade theories, and deriving the complicated strategies which are responsible for trade, and accordingly the countries can able to tap benefits out of it. Now, based on our last week discussion, last week lecture, we discussed largely on Hexagon model, availability of resources that determine trade, or specialization, but ultimately based on the new classical approach, we discussed imperfectly competitive imperfect specialization because of trade. Now, in this week we are here to explain the classical theory not necessarily valid. So, why the need for a new theory is required. Though imperfect competitive model, which is the focus of this particular lecture and its implications on trade and the strategies. So, this is though it is important, but we are largely again explaining new classical theories with certain assumptions are relaxed. So, the title of this presentation, this lecture is on role of imperfect competitive market and its trade. This is lecture number 16, and we have now arrived in, or we are now explaining week number 4 details. So, myself Pratap Mohanty, faculty in IIT Roorkee in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. Now, let us have a complete outline of the new trade theory. First of all, in the last class I have shown this flow chart. Now, let us read between the boxes. Here we say HOS model explains only part of the real world. Why real world? Because there are lots of criticisms also through Leuwenhoek paradox, or also through other subsequent studies like Professor Minhan studies on factor intensity reversal. We also added certain extension to that theory, because it goes by a very limited version of assumptions. Some assumptions are not realistic, like assumptions like the production function, though is much advanced than that of the classical one. They assume that it follows a increasing cost function, but the production function follows constant returns to scale. So, it is nonlinear, but the expansion path follows a constant ray or constant direction, which is highly criticized by the or identified by the new theory, especially in the works of Krugman, Professor Krugman of field, because of Krugman and Ostfeld. So, and already received Nobel Prize for it. Now, so a number of restrictive assumptions are again relaxed, like same technology is not assumed, perfect competition not necessarily followed, constant returns is rejected, this is also rejected, homogeneous factors of production also rejected. So, these are very important assumptions which are relaxed. Now, based on this we are here to explain increasing returns to scale function, which is quite natural in the present days production function. So, which is eventually the increasing returns to scale and its position in the production function result imperfect competitive structure, and imperfections in the market differentiate products by quality, by they are safe, by certain features. So, which again eventually lead for possibility of intra-industry trade is also discussed here, trade within the same firm or industries. And that also lead to outsourcing, because in order to differentiate the product and to minimize the expenditure. So, as I already discussed in the last class, some bit of explanation on it, that the products can be produced qualitatively by outsourcing its unit, either by outsourcing or offshoring. Either you outsource and assemble in one place, or completely you assemble also in another place. So, through offshoring. So, which also exploit international economies of scale. Here we are emphasizing economy of scale, which is a result of increasing returns scale function. So, gains for all the factors of production, not just abundant factor. So, it actually contradicts the conclusion, the bottom line of earlier function. So, therefore, it leads to specialization even if both the nations have exactly the same endowment, because of the fact that qualitatively the trade is possible to differentiate the product qualitatively. Okay. So, that is the bottom line of today's lecture, and even in the next lecture we will examine with the help of certain instrument, certain numerical or through equations. Now, what are the background then? Further backgrounds, I have already said new classical model assumes industries are perfectly competitive and exhibit constant returns to scale and sell homogeneous products. Whatever they specialize, they will say homogeneous products. New classical theory also predicts that trade will be inter-industry in nature, no question of intra-industry in nature. This is another important features we discussed. However, the empirical evidence suggests that the structure of trade in manufactured goods is part of an intra-industry nature. So, it is in the present days actually no question of just inter-industry, or possibility of intra-industry as well. The analysis has shown that so this type of trade has something to do with imperfectly competitive market, which is due to the scale economies and differentiated goods. Even the result of increasing returns to scale in the production function is of differentiation in products. So, while defining comparative advantage, the Ricardian model and the Hexer-Rowland model both assumed constant returns to scale, which I have just said. Both assume constant returns to scale. If all factors of productions are doubled, then product will be also doubled. Then that is the meaning of constant returns to scale. But a firm or industry may have increasing returns to scale or economy of scale, which I have said, which means that if factors are double, then output will be more than that of the extent of factors applied. So, larger is more efficient. That means, larger the outcome, the industry is more efficient and can differentiate or has an edge over another industry. So, therefore, Ricardian and Hexer-Rowland model largely rely on competitive setups, and they predict that all income from production is paid to owners of factors of production. So, there is no question of excess or monopoly profit exist. So, actually in reality company always have some tendency to differentiate themselves or enjoy market power, and they they define to be leader for some time. So, these are the very common phenomena which have been largely neglected in the earlier theories. So, when economies exist, so large firms are usually efficient than the small ones. So, therefore, the argument of small versus large is very important. So, industry may also consist of monopoly or a few large firms. So, production may be imperfectly competitive in the sense that excess or monopoly profits are captured by larger firms, as we discussed just before. Now, how to then go for this new theory and how to approach for this new theory? Let us understand what is economies of scale in detail. Broadly, the economy of scale which we say that the average cost of production actually reduces as compared to the extra unit of its production. Now, this is also defining their efficiency level. So, large is the firm, higher economies are expected. Again, economies of scale are derived based on scope or based on scale. Scale economies or scope economies. People also, there are economies defined as horizontal economies and vertical economies to minimize the average cost. In simple term, if you have a in case of vertical economies, we are here to specialize on the same varieties with a large number on the same varieties, which could able to minimize the cost. And second aspect is, instead of the same variety, we can add little extension of that variety horizontally. For example, if you are producing, a company can produce some plastic items, maybe plastic bottle, maybe plastic box, maybe plastic bucket. In this direction, the firm can able to tap these differences very clearly, very clearly. So, what how firm can able to minimize the cost, as I just said, if we cite an example of plastic bottle. So, if initially the company or the firm can able to generate 1000 plastic bottle, and they have capabilities to produce plastic boxes also, because it hardly add any incremental cost. So, what is important here is the following: the firm if add related products with this almost with the same setups, can able to tremendously reduce their average cost, is not it? So, in that context, we feel there are possibility of horizontal extension. So, horizontal economies are also expected to add, vertical economies or horizontally, these are called economy of scope. Now, there are other way by which the external economies are added through external channels or through internal channels. So, external economy of scale are defined as per unit output or per unit cost per unit of output, which gets changed depends on the size of the industry. So, if the industry size increases, per unit of cost or cost per unit of output gets changed, whereas internal economy is defined as cost per unit of output depends on the size of the firm. If the individual firm and its output increases, then there are high chances of internal economies. So, there are two ways which is very important to discuss. External economies of scale may result if a larger firm or larger industry allows for more efficient provision of services or equipment to the firms in the industry. So, similarly, you can in converse we can discuss for the small firm as well. Internal economies of scale result when large firms have cost advantage over small firms, basically within the firm, which leads to an imperfectly competitive market. So, we are largely emphasizing here internal economies. Now, let us compare competition as an extension to microeconomic theory and deriving economies out of it, economy of scale out of it. We wish to discuss how competition and monopoly are actually different and by which approach they are different. So, monopoly in one or as we know, it is of one or more of the industries in the basic model, which resulted in a distortion, because monopoly usually occupied by the individual firm. So, individual firm may largely minimize their expenditure, their cost. So, average cost of production actually gets minimized. So, abstracting from the reason for monopoly and given constant returns to scale, assume the home country has a monopoly producer of good X. Let us assume by this, so that we can prove differently. So, given the constant returns to scale and assume the home country has a monopoly producer of good X, under perfect competition what really happens? Price gets equalized with MC, price is equal to MC. But whereas you know I mean if it is a perfectly competitive market, we know that the equilibrium exists where P x by P y is equal to its marginal cost of one industry with marginal cost of another in another firm, that should be equal with MRT, which we have discussed several times. Okay. Now, whereas in case of monopoly, we wanted to discuss in a very different manner. What is that? So, in monopoly set off, let us define, given this assumption, let us define total revenue of the monopoly firm is as P x into number of products produced, that is called total products. Now, what is the marginal product? A marginal product of or x, which is simply delta or d of T r, which is actually equal to, if you define it, P x into d x, basically P x into d x plus x or x into d P x. So, this is what called marginal revenue. Now, next to it, we just wanted to differentiate the markup pricing enjoyed by the monopolist and how this markup price is actually responsible for intra-industry trade or leverage in trade and differentiation, differentiate products as an outcome of these markets. We wanted to arrive there through the equations. So, this is what here we defined. Now, let us from the previous equation, let us take P x outside or factor out P x. So, this has resulted in, if I take P x out, so this will be basically P x here. So, the d x plus here x by P x into d P x. This is what is the result. D P x, if I take outside, then this is our result. Okay. So, P x is common, or either if I divide it by d x, no, if I dividing by d x, then this is the result. From the equation, if I simply divide d x, what is left? P x plus x into, so let us write it down again in the next slide. So, we said T r, which is equal to P x into x. Now, we said d T r, which is equal to M r x, a marginal revenue of x, which is equal to P x into d of x plus x into d P x. This is what we have said. Now, let us divide it by d x to arrive into the conclusion. So, it is P x plus x into d P x divided by d x. Okay. Now, this is what is explained here. All right. Now, dpx divided by dx into x is written. This shows that for a monopolist, marginal revenue will be less than price, because marginal revenue is now added, I mean will be less than price, given that this should be less, if this is less than 0. dpx by dx, if the slope, the change of price, once it gets if every additional change in the prices is lesser and lesser, if it is negative, then marginal revenue of the successive items or successive productions will be less than that of the Px. And if this component is negative, and usually this component is negative, because their demand curve is downward sloping. So, now let us multiply the second term of 5 here, equation number 5 we wanted to mention here, by Px by Px. If we multiply the or factor out by Px, what it resulted if I just take Px outside. Okay. If I just take Px outside, so what is left here? Simply if I take Px outside, this is 1 plus x by Px. So, this is x by Px dpx by dx. Okay. So, this is what is written. Now, the term dpx by dx or in reverse, now look at this carefully. I mean, if we just look at differently in a reverse term, dx by dp into p by x, this is nothing but elasticity of demand. So, price elasticity of demand, and here it is just the inverse. So, it means px plus 1 upon E. Okay. So, the elasticity price elasticity of demand for x. Now, substituting this in the elasticity, we will get the elasticity function like this. Since elasticity of demand is by virtue it is negative. So, equation boils down to this px. So, this is basically px. We have taken px outside as common. So, it is not plus. So, it is actually px times 1 plus 1. I mean, now it is not plus, it is minus, because by structure elasticity of demand is negative. Okay. Since price and quantity are inversely related by demand. So, and this is equal to marginal revenue of x. From there we have derived this is also equal to marginal cost of x. Now, what is important here? What is the important interpretation here? So, interpretation is that look at what is the marginal cost and how this is comparable to price, and this is a marginal revenue and how it is comparable to price of the product. Now, we have earlier said in the perfectly competitive setup, marginal revenue is equal to price of x, but now these two terms are not equal. That will be that is actually factored out by certain extent of elasticity of demand. Now, in this context I wanted to give you a background to it. Now, how in the present days those who are the price leaders or the firm with with huge expertise, or the firm which are efficient enough have been or have been consistently reducing their average cost of production, and due to that they claim as the leader in the market, and they have certain monopoly power in the market. So, these type of natural outcome derived from their efficiency in the production pattern lead to be defined as natural monopoly. And in case of natural monopoly, it is not just natural monopoly, we are defining natural monopoly where their average cost is consistently reducing. So, since the average cost is reducing, those type of company can take advantage out of it and can reduce their prices consistently till the level of attaining their marginal cost level. So, therefore, the company tap the benefit out of it differently. Now, in this diagram we wanted to mention certain important features. Now, here the perfectly competitive setup where all the items like MR Px by Py or MRT marginal rate of technical are all equal. But if there is possibility of monopoly power attached or monopoly power attached in the market, those firms can able to minimize their cost of production and they may claim certain extent of monopoly in the market. Their prices are now different. Now, this is mentioned here, we will interpret it. Under monopoly, given 1 upon inverse elastic function measures the markup pricing markup price over marginal cost, because this is what the marginal cost differs from firm to firm. Now, now the equation which I have said is here. Now, our Px by Py instead of Px by Py, it is actually markup by the extent of inverse elasticity of demand of that particular product. So, now Px is attached with the elasticity of demand divided by Py, which is equal to mx marginal cost of x upon marginal cost of y, which is will be equal to MRT of x and y should be less than that of Px by Py, because since elasticity, this component is negative in the equation. If you will read it carefully, since this is negative, the marginal cost or the marginal cost is actually factored out by the extent of elasticity of demand. Okay. So, price so price is actually higher than that of price they are charging is higher than that of marginal cost. Now, look at here, the price, the relative price of X is higher than that of the marginal cost. So, as Px is higher than that of marginal cost, equilibrium price ratio, that is Pxy, is greater than that of the slope of the production frontier. Okay. It is given here, the slope is now relatively higher because of monopolistic pricing. So, AM is the autarky equilibrium, we have already said AM is the autarky equilibrium given the cases of monopoly power in the market. Now, why is it so? Because their relative prices is higher due to the extent of elasticity of demand, they vary given their nature of production in the market. So, it is not equated with the marginal cost. Now, the pricing is higher than that of the pricing of the product is higher than that of the unit marginal cost. So, AM is the autarky equilibrium, we have already said for the home country given the autarky price ratio PM. Out of X below competitive level at A. So, now monopoly power enjoys differently, we have already said at a different point, and accordingly they tap the benefit. Now, let us understand if it is pro competitive, if the monopoly gains are actually made competitive enough. So, if it is pro competitive, I mean gains because of if the monopoly power translated into some sort of competitiveness in the market, and especially this is derived due to trade. Trade before during autarky or before trade or in the autarky situation, there are high chances of enjoying the monopoly power, but when trade takes place, the demands and supplies are now now exchanged at the global level. So, there are more number of competitors, there are high chances of getting better competition in the market. So, due to which the monopoly which you have defined at point A during the autarky is not necessarily going to be enjoyed. Now, this is competitive market price. Now, due to trade they may able to reduce the price level in the international market even better than that of the competitive scenario, and due to the exchange effect also they will land in a higher consumption level because of differentiation in the products. So, therefore, the trade or the pro competitive gains out of trade help the consumers largely, and country will get huge benefit out of it. So, what kind of we know it that monopoly power often distort the market. So, distortion induced by monopoly is endogenous compared to say production tax, that is. Now, what I wanted to emphasize here, endogeneity of monopoly power. Often the case many firms endogenize the monopoly power to differentiate their product, but after trade that gets neutralized for the consumers as well as for the producers, because they get larger market for the producers and for the consumer they get different variety of products. So, as the monopoly distortion is endogenous, trade may have additional benefits, which I just said there is imperfect competition. So, pro competitive gains arise due to trade. So, the autarky point as used to be defined at point A, which I have discussed before at this on this figure, is no longer going to be defined. Now, the autarky point is going to be changed, and X being monopolized, commodity X being monopolized, assuming this is a small country, it faces fixed world prices, when it trades. So, which we assume are equal to undistorted autarky price. This means that if X being monopolized and the country we are assuming to be small enough, they faces fixed world prices when it trades, because after trade now they are no longer monopolizing the particular product. Therefore, PA, this is not in times, it is only P or monopoly price is equivalent to the P star, because now they are opened off, the country will be more competitive. when so we trade formal monopoly faces a constant Px. So, again equalize with the extent of marginal revenue. The perceived elasticity of demand is infinite. So, monopoly distortion goes to 0, because elastic demand for the market in the international market is going to be infinite for their product. So, since since it is P times 1 minus 1 upon E. So, these approximate to infinite. So, the value of the this one is equal to 0. So, 1 upon infinite is 0. So, it will equal to P. So, MR now equal to equalize with P after trade. So, therefore, the economy of scale which are enjoyed by certain firms and can able to internalize in their production function, which differentiate the product and give large variety of products to be consumed by the consumers and give better markets. So, lead to huge competition, and that competition is going to be robust. Now, in another couple of slides within 1 minute I am going to talk about what do you mean by then monopolistic competition. We have said monopoly. In monopolistic competition, largely there are more number of firms, which is evidenced from international market due to globalization, and firms produce differentiated products, which is a natural outcome of economy of scale, and they can able to sell differently. Now, we will discuss in the next class on how an individual firm faces different extent of their product, given the fact that there are other competitions. Now, these are some of the area, I mean some of the numerical equations which will prove that whether monopolistic competition is going to differentiate the product and also simultaneously make the market very competitive. Now, we will carry forward this discussion, this particular discussion especially for the monopolistic competition and some kind of game theoretic strategy in the next class. And in between, just one thing I will suggest, that what kind of questions you must prepare here. Try to prepare the complete features of monopolistic market. We may ask you how monopolistic competition in the in the trade context helps countries to grow, okay, and how monopolistic competitive behavior or the economy of scale of production minimize the monopolization strategies once the country is opened up. This type of discussion you may go through in between. It will be very easy to understand correctly in the next class. I think I should stop here. We will continue in the next class. Thank you.